538, he ascends the throne under the protection of the Eastern Roman Empire, under the emperor himself, and assumes the authority of the Justinian decree.
For years there has been a common mantra spoken by many Seventh-day Adventists, that a decree given by the Emperor Justinian established the Bishop of Rome's ecclesiastical and temporal authority. There are literally dozens of websites stating that this decree went into effect in the year 538 AD, and that this is a fact of history which can be verified by any authoritative historical source. And yet to date I have not seen a single authoritative source describing how Justinian's letter went into effect in that year, or anything even remotely showing that it bequeathed temporal power or political.
Listen to this from the History of the Christian Church, Volume 3. The Roman Church State's power became supreme in Christendom in when? 538 AD. Due to a letter of the Roman Emperor Justinian, known as Justinian's decree, which set up and acknowledged the Bishop of Rome as the head of all, what everyone? Churches. When did that take place? 538 AD. So what happened that year? It gave the Roman Church State political power, civil power, as well as ecclesiastical power. This letter became part of Justinian's code, the fundamental law of the empire, and that year, Pope Vigilius ascended the throne under the military protection of one of Justinian's generals, Belisarius. What year did that take place, everyone? 538.
Well, I must say I'm a bit surprised. In all of my reading, I have yet to come across this reference. Well, Adventists, congratulations. No longer can it be said that the theories surrounding 538 AD have no backing by anyone outside of Protestant circles. It says it right there in the History of the Christian Church, Volume 3, page... Wait a minute. Who is the author? That's a bit odd, especially since the other references David provided show the authors' names. Well, there are certainly a lot of histories of the Christian Church out there. I wonder if there's any internal evidence within the quote that could help us narrow things down a bit. Let's see. Power became supreme, fundamental law, Vigilius ascended... Wait, Vigilius ascended the throne under the military protection of Belisarius. That kind of sounds familiar. It reminds me of a line in Philip Schaff's History of the Christian Church, Volume 3, page 327. Eureka! We found it! And just like David said, Schaff first talks about Justinian's decree and how it granted the church-state political power, civil power, and... Wait, where's the part about the Roman church-state's supreme power in 538 AD? Or the decree giving it political, civil, and ecclesiastical power? Hey, Schaff doesn't mention any of those things on that page. In fact, he doesn't even mention those ideas throughout the rest of the volume. That means we've been rickrolled. Okay, maybe not. I guess it just means that the quote is not genuine after all. It was someone's personal view of history that was made to look like a quote from Philip Schaff. Now, David brings up the claim that Justinian's letter gave the Roman Church State political power in 538 AD. I've actually seen Adventists go much further, claiming that the letter was sent in order to settle the question of primacy, and that it even granted the bishops of Rome sovereign authority over the Western Roman Empire. Of course, the letter says nothing like that. I would like to take the time to set the record straight. Justinian's 533 AD letter to Pope John II was penned in order to resolve the Theopaschite dispute. It did not award papal primacy or political power. This is what happened. As I explained in my Kenneth Cox series, there was a Christological conflict in the 6th century between Monophysite and Chalcedonian Christians. Monophysites believed Jesus essentially had one divine nature. They rejected the Council of Chalcedon, believing it reversed the decisions of the Council of Ephesus and allowed Nestorianism to corrupt Orthodox Christianity. On the other hand, Chalcedonians rejected the Monophysite heresy and accepted the doctrine of Christ's two natures. In order to heal this rift, attempts were made to express the faith in ways that both sides could accept. Emperor Zeno tried with the Henoticon in 482 AD, but failed miserably. In early 519 AD, a group of Chalcedonic ecclesiastics named the Scythian monks came to Constantinople and began advocating an alternative Christological doctrine called the Theopaschite formula, Essentially, one of the Trinity suffered in the flesh. It was rejected by both Emperor Justin and his nephew Justinian, so the monks sent representatives to Rome seeking the Pope's backing, but Pope Hormisdas eventually rejected the formula as well. However, Justinian came to realize that the Scythians' formula might serve as a valuable olive branch to monophysites, since it was based in part on Cyrillian theology and was anti-Nestorian in nature. Since the monophysites were fervent adherents of St. Cyril, and since Nestorians would never agree with the formula, if he could get the universal church to accept the formula as an article of faith, it would show that the Chalcedonians and Cyril were of one accord, and that the monophysite charge of Nestorianism had no teeth. The path to reconciliation could begin. So after he obtained the imperial throne 7 years later, Justinian began to publish laws in the East that made the Theopaschite formula an essential element of his Orthodox creed. When he published another such law in early 533 AD, a group of strict Chalcedonic clergy called the Sleepless Monks objected. They pointed out that Pope Hormisdas had already rejected the formula 13 years earlier. Justinian's response was to declare the monks to be Nestorian heretics, and so the monks were left with no other recourse than to send a delegation to Rome in the hope that the current bishop would vindicate them by agreeing with his predecessor. Justinian found out about this envoy and decided to send a delegation of his own to Rome, with letters meant to convince the Pope that his views were indeed orthodox and that the Sleepless Monks' opposition amounted to Nestorianism. The point of all that backstory is this. The 533 AD letter that some refer to as Justinian's decree was one of the letters sent with the Byzantine delegation to argue in favor of the Theopaschite formula. The letter was not sent to award primacy to the Bishop of Rome, but to convince the Pope that Justinian's views were in line with Orthodox teaching. Now, you would never realize this when reading about the letter from most Adventist sources, because they generally provide the letter's introduction and conclusion while trying to pass both parts off as the text of the letter. Now, it took Pope John II almost a year to send his response back to Justinian, but the delay had nothing to do with the antiquated modes of communication at the time. The fact of the matter is, Justinian's support of the Theopaschite formula was in direct opposition to Pope Hormisdas' ruling on the matter, and Pope John did not think that he could endorse the formula without contradicting the decision of an earlier pope. But on the other hand, Justinian had already declared the doctrine's orthodoxy in the East, and had labeled all who opposed it as Nestorians. If John rejected the formula, he would be putting himself in open opposition with the emperor. It was the proverbial rock and a hard place. Either contradict a deceased pope, or be rejected by the Eastern emperor. Justinian was subtly pitting one pope against another, all the while claiming that he was subjecting the East to the Apostolic See and forbidding any church matter to be discussed without first bringing it to the notice of the Pope, which of course was nonsense. Look at what Justinian says at the end of the letter. Underneath the flattering language, there is a clear but thinly veiled threat. Either make known to Justinian that the things reported represent genuine doctrine, or the influence of Rome would decrease, the unity of the churches would not occur, and the rest of the Eastern bishops would follow his doctrine anyway. The thing is, this isn't really conjecture. Exactly 20 years later, Justinian did precisely that. He pushed his agenda during the Council of Constantinople in 553 AD, ignoring Pope Vigilius' attempts at compromise and repudiating the judgment of the Pope in the midst of the entire assembly. Ultimately, Justinian's goals for the council were accomplished, and Vigilius' authority was diminished throughout the Eastern and Western churches as a result. So anyway, back to the original topic. After about a year of indecision, Pope John finally approved Justinian's profession of faith, and the Sleepless Monks were rewarded for their tireless defense of orthodoxy by being excommunicated. The reason why Justinian incorporated the 533 AD letters into his legislation had nothing to do with granting political power to the Roman bishops, or awarding papal primacy as if it were some elaborate finale of American Idol. The letters were incorporated to further legitimize the Cyrillian Christology being legislated in the East. Justinian's actual decree concerning papal primacy was the 131st novel enacted in 545 AD.
This period is very interesting because after this period, in AD 538, the papal rule commenced according to the Justinian decree, which said that the papacy would be the corrector of heretics and that he would be the head of all the churches. So you had a church-state scenario.
The 533 AD letter did recognize the Bishop of Rome as being, at that time, the head of all churches. There is simply nothing in the text suggesting that the Pope would be the head at some later point, as Veith's wording suggests. However, the part about the papacy becoming the corrector of heretics is entirely incorrect. I believe this whole idea originates with George Crowley, and is based on a mistranslation of Justinian's letter to Patriarch Epiphanius in 533 AD. A letter in which the emperor informs the Patriarch that the Bishop of Rome had recently restrained heretics within his jurisdiction. This was not a title or a commission. It was simply recognition of what the Pope had already done. There is no decree in the Justinian Code making the Pope the true and effective corrector of heretics. That is simply a myth. In the same letter, Justinian tells Epiphanius that he himself had recently issued an edict refuting the insanity of the heretics. In novel number 9, Justinian made it clear that he was the source of both secular and ecclesiastical jurisprudence. And 11 years later, in novel 132, we find him yet again making it his business to legislate against heresy, proving that the emperor was not handing correction responsibilities to the Bishop of Rome. And on that note, I think I'll bring this very stimulating topic to a close. Looking ahead, I think for the next video I'll switch things up a bit and tackle an entirely different kind of subject matter. One that doesn't have anything to do with Roman history or the Catholic Church. Okay, maybe just a little.